Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. And I am already just so excited as I've been looking in the Hey, East St. Louis, how are you? I'm just looking in the chat. Um, Karen, Luna from East St. Louis, Deb, Santafort, preschool, SLP. Yes, I love it when we have our related services personnel on, Suzanne, Jessica, I'm just kind of reading these as I'm going along, but just have to. Queen Dixon, parent, guardian, other in Illinois. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Eh, I was just on a meeting today, a 2 hour long meeting, and that meeting was about family engagement, family engagement. How do we engage families? How do we inform families? How do we listen to families? So welcome. So happy to have you here. Zeta Marcos, pre-K teacher in a private organization. And if you would not mind, Zeta, telling us where the name of your organization, you can either come off mute real quick and do it or put that in the chat. So much of what we are doing here, especially through ECPL with these professional learning opportunities, it's to connect all of us. So it's community-based, Head Start, charter, private, families, preschool, kindergarten, really trying to connect all of us so that our messaging and practices are aligned and correlated as much as possible. So I'm always excited when we see anybody from community-based program that's part or any even a private organization. So Zeta, if you wouldn't mind in the chat sharing, that's great. And if you prefer not, that's fine as well. Director of Curriculum and Instruction. So we've got some district personnel on. Chara Gupta, PFA teacher, enrichment teacher. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. If you wouldn't mind jumping in the chat and sharing a little bit more about what it is that you actually do in your role. I don't believe I've seen your name before, so and I'm really interested to see what enrichment teacher means. Literacy math interventionist in public school pre-kindergarten program. Mary, you're about to be so busy because our state has just approved our full out comprehensive literacy plan. And so we already know that literacy, you know what our state is trying to do, you know, for a long time, you all with literacy was at the top of our game and we were so on it with literacy. Then we realized, oh, what's going on with math? And so we kind of pivoted to math, right? And then we looked and said, uh-oh, now something's happening back with literacy. And of course, the pandemic and the ongoing impact of the pandemic hasn't helped any of this. And so our state actually has a law talking about the need for comprehensive literacy program. And I'm so grateful that as that plan was written, pre-K is included in there. The plan was just approved. We can just keep our eyes and ears open because by the end of this year, the state board will be actually showing us what that rubric will look like. And so you will be very busy. And guess what, you all? MTSS, not only was it written into the law, whoop, whoop, but it's also written into the plan. So y'all already know I'm already in the 24-25 school year so that we can figure out what MTSS, how we will be able to come back and help you all with this literacy plan and not see it as a one-off. We still got literacy, and you still got kids, and you still got ECHRS 3 and NWEA and, monitoring visits, how to really synthesize all of these practices more through an MTSS framework. Children's Center and Cicero, thanks for sharing. And I think I was looking for Time to Soar, Deborah. Just so many people. Hey, Northern Illinois. I know some folks up there in Northern. And in fact, you're going to learn there's somebody that's presenting with me today, hint, hint, Lori, who really knows a lot about Northern Illinois. So welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being with us today. Just want to let you know I've got one more little chat that I'm going to ask you to let us know. I can just, y'all, we were having some tech issues before you got on, so just
We're good. We're good.
okay, everybody. Like, ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, we got to get to 5:30. In the chat, if you were with us for any of the previous sessions, just jump in and say, yes, October 11th, yes, November 15th, yes, January 18th, or no. If you find yourself in that, what is happening? Well, you mean there was some more before this? Not to worry at all. This series was built so that you could do it a la carte or do the whole smorgasbord. So those of you that are saying no, before we finish today, Karen is going to put in the chat the link where you can go back. What ECPL has done is house all of the previous ones on their YouTube so that no one will feel lost. You know, it's like Toy Story 4. You always remember Andy. Like, you don't have to see Toy Story 1, 2, and 3 to kind of get the gist. So you will be able to go back and just at your leisure, listen to the ones that were pre-recorded. We are also going to do snippets, kind of a review of what we talked about on October 11th, November 15th, and then January 18th, just so that everybody can connect a little bit to where we're going to land today, which is, you know, really what it's all about: professional learning opportunities for staff. And I did see some of y'all that's been like, hey, Dr. Taylor, we've been hanging with you from October 11th. So we have two things that we can say here, and that is welcome and welcome back. Trying to, Lori, can you advance on your end? It is not letting me. There you go, right there. Thank you, Lori. So for those of you that are just joining us today, welcome. And I do see that Karen did put that in the chat. And for those of you, if you've been with us for all three, one or two or one, this is a welcome back. All are welcome here for this very good information. As you look at our next slide, we're going to jump in and just remind everyone that this is brought to us by Early Childhood Professional Learning. You see their website. There's so much great information there. Early Childhood Professional Learning, the project director is Cindy Berry, and they really do all of the professional learning across our state for not only for Preschool for All and Preschool for All expansion programs, but those of you, like you said, I'm a family member, I'm a related services personnel, and I really want to learn more about this work. They kind of house this as you look at our next slide. It is in collaboration with Illinois MTSS Network. And this is just simply a way for us to keep reminding everybody. In Illinois, we're so blessed. We are one of the few states that has an infrastructure for MTSS from pre-K all the way through grade 12. And so whenever and wherever possible, the Early Childhood Professional Learning tries to collaborate with the Illinois MTSS network so that our messaging is clear, it's collaborative, and it is aligned. If you look at that next slide, you're going to see me before COVID when I did not have these hair days that required a hat. Okay. This is me, a little bit of information about myself and the work I'm doing. I'm an independent consultant. This is just a little bit of information about myself, work that I do on a state, federal, and municipal level. And as you look at our next slide, hint, hint, those of you from Northern, guess who's with us today?
Yes, I'll just say hi real quick. I'm the director of the Illinois MTSS Network, and we're part of the Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development at Northern Illinois University, and we are proud to be a Husky.
And then we're going to let you know as we look at our next slide, and those of you that have been with us before, we go straight through. We try to go straight through. We try to give you a little bit of time back on the end. So be self-attuned. If you need to take a break, if you need to go get some tea, hot chocolate, glass of water, leave your sound on so you can hear us, but go ahead, step away, come back. We do a lot in the chats, everyone. So we just going to take off our educator, professional, doctoral, master degree, all of those hats and just throw them. I'm not going to take off my hat because I already told you all what kind of hair day I'm having, but just take off your figurative chat, right? And don't worry about spell checking and grammar. This is a safe space for grammar grades. So when we ask you to jump in the chat, just jump right on in there and get your thoughts out. So we are, as promised, going to just recap as we look at our next slide. We're going to briefly recap October 11th, November 15th, and January 18th, starting with our next slide, looking at October 11th. So the foundation of all of this really was to just define what is MTSS through the lens of how we see it now, while at the same time, kind of as we look at our next slide, helping everybody see how it started. And how it started was with the law, looking at our next slide, No Child Left Behind law asked us in that law to determine how a child responds to scientific research-based intervention. I love how the word RTI is like right there in the law, responds to intervention. Like, who came up with that? Was it rocket science? It wasn't rocket science at all. We just lifted that language right on out of the No Child Left Behind law that really said it was important for us to, within a process of evaluating students, really include all the things that we did to intervene when we saw children struggling and then document how they responded. In addition to that, as we look at the next slide, Yep, that's it. The tenets of response to intervention were also within the current Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Should have been reauthorized a long time ago, but we are still working with this law as it is. And within that law, it talked about the need to have a multi-tiered approach to doing what? Providing instruction. Come on, you all, we're early childhood. Early childhood, as we know from NAEYC, our partners at NAEYC, is birth to age 8. So we already know that when you provide instruction, one size does not fit all. And guess what? One size does not usually even fit most. I don't care what those labels say. So what do? You have a multi-tiered approach to instruction. And we start with our universal practices, evidence-based practices. And then when we see the needs of our children, we increase that level of intensity. And then the law also says you always have to monitor progress and then look at your data and analyze it. And as we do that, because this law is specific to children that may be found eligible for specialized services, the law told us that we have to include all of that information in addition to when we sit down at the table to say, does this child meet the needs for eligibility for specialized services? And so as we look at our next slide, because the law said this, we had No Child Left Behind, which they kind of was the reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and IDEA. We're looking at our next slide. Illinois, of course, to be complicit with the law, began this journey of creating RTI plans as part of their No Child Left Behind plan, sent that up to the Department of Ed, got it approved, and then between January 1, 2009 and July 1, 2010, lots of training was happening in our districts. So now, right now, if you are a community-based program or a private program, you will already know that maybe some of that information you may not have gotten because the law was very specific to those schools receiving public funding. So it was local education agencies, which are districts, and state education agencies, which of course in Illinois is the State Board of Education. But all of this was done to make sure that within the law, No Child Left Behind, by July 1, 2010, all districts were supposed to be able, willing, and ready and able to implement an RTI plan. Then, y'all, as we look at the next slide, we go into what we did November 15th. We really went from where we were to where we are now. And where we are now, as we look at our next slide, is just like everything else, RTI grew up. And how RTI grew up was we learned some very valuable lessons from No Child Left Behind. And one of the things that we learned from No Child Left Behind, that when you put scientifically based research in a law and really don't define it, everybody, every state, districts within states, schools within districts within states, and sometimes from classroom to classroom, the definition of what scientifically based was defined differently, and therefore the practice was different. When we went from No Child Left Behind and reauthorized the law to what it is today, Every Student Succeeds Act, we learned. So scientifically based research was replaced with evidence-based. And you'll notice here, we also had a paradigm shift in the thinking because evidence-based practices focused on sustaining student outcomes and improving student achievement. As you look at our next slide, you see that we were so smart that not only did we change the wording in the law, we defined it, right? We learned from that misstep from No Child Left Behind. And as you look at the next slide, here is how evidence-based is defined, actually written in the law. I'm looking at all these chats coming in with all these childcare. I like hug. And if you're going to be at the Preschool for All Administrators conference in April, tap me on the shoulder. I'm going to be there. I'm just really looking forward to meeting everyone, hearing how you say, hey, we went back and we tried that. This is what went well. Here's where we're still scratching our head about. And if you are a PFA, PFAE program, Karen, if you get an opportunity to drop that information in the chat, that conference is April 22nd and April 23rd. It's the first face-to-face conference since the pandemic, and so going to be a lot of great sessions there, opportunities for networking with all of our colleagues, anyone that is receiving PFA, Preschool for All, Preschool for All expansion pro funding. This is your place to be in April. There is the information, and the link will also let you know about the hotel spacing and everything. So again, I saw that pop up about the childcare, and this is really great information for you to have. And let me just, I'm going off script, Lori, so sorry about that. If anybody needs MTSS, it is community-based programs, because between DCFS, Head Start Frameworks, Preschool for All, right, which is that means you're getting Preschool for All funding. So that's Illinois State Board of Education and licensing. If anyone needs to synthesize their practices, it is community-based programs. Why? Because we want to shift away from all of these different things that we have to do to creating an integrated system to where if you do 1, 2, 3 things really well, you cover so many different evidence-based practices, requirements that you're called to do. So back to our regularly scheduled program. So you look at our next slide, my excitement around Every Student Succeeds Act is because now we shifted from that, oh, this is about figuring out what to do with students when they struggle. Because remember, No Child Left Behind, the law actually said how children respond to interventions when they are struggling. By default, RTI kind of became a, a, a struggle-based, deficit-based framework. It was all about find the kids that are struggling, find the kids that are struggling. Do they need an IEP or 504 plan? Okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? When in reality, the real intention of even No Child Left Behind and that RTI language within there was to see how all of our children are responding, not so much to intervention, because yes, that's what the wording in the law said, but truly, I love Lori has been sharing like RTI, response to intervention, is really, really terrific instruction. So with Every Student Succeeds Act, now we have this flexibility to really look at supporting students as we look at our next slide in this way. We're not solely talking about, does this child need an IEP? Have we done everything that we need? Now look at the law. ESSA, commonly known as Every Student Succeeds Act, high performing students. How many of us know that some of our students who need us greatly, they don't need an IEP. They're almost like this 4-year-old is 14 or like 4 going on 14 or 3 going on 30. Those are high performing students. very explicit language about multilingual learners. Yes, it includes students who are receiving special education services, but guess what? Every student that has a barrier to learning does not need an IEP or have an IEP or a 504 plan. Sometimes we think about students in care, students who may be experiencing barriers to learning because they are in temporary homeless situations. So many different things that ESSA kind of opens up the door wide for us to look at how we support our children in our classrooms and how we support their families. Look how it's specific about having that aligned conversation between general and special education teachers. Love that school climate and safety. Just bold printed some things here. Really involves that student mental and behavioral health, which is why this series ends here. We're going to be doing two more that are specifically going to be focusing all about asset-based trauma-informed practices through an MTSS framework. And then this last bullet point, I just am so excited about because it lets us know when you're doing professional development or professional learning, it can't be a checklist. Well, we did that. We did that when? August when? August 2020. It's August 2024 now. Ongoing professional learning is necessary. So as we look at our next slide, as I've already said, ESSA gave us an opportunity to have a whole huge paradigm mindset shift from how do students respond when we intervene because they are struggling in the learning environment to what in ESSA leading to and sustaining student outcomes. And then they were so deep to say, namely, how do we improve student achievement and how do we do that throughout the learning environment? As we look at our next slide. In Illinois, we are so blessed. As I said before, we have a pre-K to grade 12 MTSS infrastructure. We all operate off of one definition. Here it is right in front of you. For those of you that have been with us before, you've seen this. This definition actually was created by the Illinois MTSS network. And when Cindy Berry, who is the ECPL project director, and the Early Childhood MTSS Consortium is facilitated through ECPL. Actually, MTSS is actually written in their grant deliverables. Cindy adopted this definition so that we could have one whole framework. Looking at our next slide. Illinois continued, and again, pat yourself on the back, Illinois. Illinois has been very, very, I think, advanced, even from No Child Left Behind to RTI. And our state, even as our state was creating its RTI plan, early childhood was included in that through the space of ECPL, as Illinois also was very clear on the rights of families when it comes to RTI. This document you see here was initially put out in 2009 when Every Student Succeeds Act was created. They began to revise and review this document. And then August 2020, a revised document was put out. And I was blessed to be able to work with the editors on that. So we went through and anything that said RTI, we updated it to say MTSS so that what Illinois has when it talks about educational rights and responsibilities for families is in line with Every Student Succeeds Act and is in line with MTSS. So as we go on, one of the things that we realized from ESSA is that there are so many evidence-based practices. It's not just one, it's not just two, there's a whole lot. And so we talked about the fact that that's a problem. It's a problem when you have all these evidence-based practices. We know that we must use them because the law says we need to, but when we try to implement them in a way that's separate, we can attain it, but the problem is we as adults are not able to sustain those practices. So if we can't sustain the practices, we know that the children are not going to be able to sustain their positive growth and achievement. So our theory of change, look at our next slide, we need a comprehensive system. to synthesize all of the existing evidence-based practices. And I would also say there that when you have a comprehensive system, I love this graphic because it kind of reminds me of like a weeping willow tree. And willow trees, you know, when that wind blows, they're very, very flexible. So existing evidence-based practices, but we know in education, we love to create new initiatives and new reform. And so when you have a comprehensive system, it is flexible enough that when a new initiative or a new reform comes, just like we were talking about this comprehensive literacy plan that's going to go forth in our state, the system is built to be able to withstand. Next slide. Look how I did this, you all. Next slide. The building process, right? So you take this new brick, and the first thing you see, and this is like a moving slide. So go ahead and click away there, Lori. When you get new things that come in, where does this fit in with community? Where does this fit in what we're already doing with staff? Where does this fit in what we're already doing with families? What are our practices? What are our data? And then we see common threads, and we don't add on, we just say this fits here in the system that I am building. We're almost ready to get into today, January 18th. We talked about data. We've got to be data nerds, you all. We've got to embrace data. We've got to love data. Data is our friend if we listen to it and have positive conversations. So at our next slide, we just did a little bit about the historical context of data in Illinois, really as it relates to MTSS and how we got to that pesky triangle. So the next slide, the truth is data informed the triangle. The triangle was not the triangle is not our boss. It does not get to tell us what to do. As No Child Left Behind was being written, folks were looking at data and realizing how our children's achievement looked by the numbers. So 80 to 90% of all children with universal practice that are implemented to fidelity, they are successful. You have some students, though, even with those universal practices implemented to fidelity, you have some students that will struggle and will need you to do something that's a little bit more targeted, small group maybe, with them. And then the data also showed that even when you've got universal practices implemented to fidelity, even when you do targeted support, there are some students that are going to need more individualized, intensive support from us. From those numbers, next slide, the triangle was born. And because so many of us are visual, that triangle was like the green is okay, yellow is caution, red is like danger, Will Robinson. Do something quick, do something fast. In addition to what you're seeing here, PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports, had been a long-standing framework in our country. They use that same type of graphic. And so it made sense to just say, since the numbers kind of line up between behavior systems and academic systems, the triangle was adopted. But guess what, you all? That data, next slide, could look like this. Next slide, that data could look like this. What is important is not how we show the data, but what we do with it. And so if you like the triangle, have at it. If you want to do a bar graph, go that way. If you want to do a pie chart, go that way. It's okay, next slide, to reimagine the triangle so that we can build a comprehensive system that is focused on the needs of our students in such a way where it is flexible. And again, we're not trying to fit children, and even as we talk about today, staff in a box or a triangle. We're really making this practice work for us. And that means, next slide, we take that data, and as we analyze it, we make sure our discussions are not accusatory. When we get our Eckers 3, we have our monitoring visit, or we have a class if you're in Chicago. And a lot of our districts across the state use Eckers 3N class, Head Start uses class. When we look at our class monitoring, we look at our Eckers 3 monitoring, when we look at our kids' data, when we look at our, if you're using DRDP, My Teaching Strategies, early learning skill, work sampling systems, or core, when that data, sometimes, if we're honest, when you look at the data, it's like, uh-oh, I wasn't expecting this. We've been working so hard. We thought that our data would show that our children are achieving in this way, right? When you look at that My Teaching Strategies and you're looking at those color bands, we want our discussions around data not to be accusatory, but to say, okay, let's dig in here. Let's find the diamond in the rough. Where are our bright spots? Everything doesn't have to be a trigger. Some things can be a glimmer, right? Where are the bright spots that can be starting points for us with all of this rich data? And it's just not that, I mean, it's your attendance data. It is your referrals for behavior concerns data. It's your family engagement data. So much data that we have that can really inform our practices in such a way where, as we look at our next slide, our trajectory takes us upward and we focus on strengths and needs. We take multiple sources because that's that multi, right? Multi-tiered system of supports. So we've got all of these tiered, multiple tiered supports. We put the system in the MTSS. And in order to have evidence-based practices that are multiple, we want to take all of our data and make decisions in a way that's strength-based so that we constantly, our trajectory grows. And I like to say it's not about compliance. Like, compliance is the basement. The ceiling is where we want to go. Next slide. Sometimes data, like I said, it does not tell us what we want to say. I have actually put my scale way to the back in the wall. We've broken up for now for a couple of reasons. I expect to let it come out of the doghouse soon, but it's not telling me what I want to say, want to hear right now. But we just got to be brave enough to get on that scale, look at that data and say, okay, I may not like what you're telling me, but we're going to figure this out together routinely, use it to help improve instruction. It helps us have conversation between schools and families, um, positive conversations between schools and families. Next slide. Go ahead and click away there, Lori. Strong data culture results when an organization believes in continuous improvement. School and districts and programs that have strong data cultures emphasize collaboration as a key for success. And elements of a strong data culture include commitment to our vision. And that vision really should be, this is just how we do business, and really define, when we say this is just how we do business, what does that mean for everyone that's involved? And you commit to that vision. And then when you look at your data, you say, okay, accountability doesn't have to be a bad word. Accountability just means, okay, let's just see, are we doing what we said we were going to be doing? And does everyone have the opportunity to be able to grow? So for instance, if we have new teachers that come in and we did all of this great professional learning at the beginning of the year, what did we do mid-year when we had new teachers come in to make sure that they also had that same opportunity for professional learning that our staff did that was with us in October? Because information that is not accessible isn't actionable. And if information isn't actionable, then our whole accountability system kind of breaks down. Next slide. And so as we shift into our conversation today, we want to talk about, go ahead and click away there, Lori. What support does our staff need? We know that children need support from us, but what support, learning and support, will all of our staff need? Will some of our staff need? Will a few of our staff members need? Now I just talked a whole lot here, y'all, so we're gonna go to the next slide and pause. What questions might you have? What aha do you have? Go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll do our little like teacher weight here. And Karen did put the information about the preschool for all the preschool for all and preschool for all expansion administrators conference. It is in the chat, so that link is right there. And Laura, I'm just looking at that pre-K 2022. Uh, um, in our state, Keshet, oh my gosh. Years ago, I was very involved with Keshet because of work I was doing statewide with autism. So I'm very familiar with Keshet. Our state is really moving from we used to be a P20 state. Now we are using language for birth to 20, and really capturing that 2020, that 22, because when we're talking about children entering college, even our state was looking at what does MTS look like in a higher ed level, because children, people who are in school, students that leave high school and go into college, they still need some supports in order to be able to do well there. What a wealth of info being shared today. Thanks. I think it's worth repeating that we want to start. Yes, Carrie, that glimmer of positive and go from there. And ESSA really gave us that opportunity to do that. That differentiate. Come on, Karen. Differentiating instruction, scaffolding instruction, and really when we talk about differentiating our practices for students, as an administrator, for those of you who are administrators on, some of our colleagues, I think was Director of Curriculum and Instruction, figuring out ways to differentiate the supports for staff as well. You know, when you have those days where you have your in-services, look at what is your data telling you? Who needs more support when it comes to lesson planning? Who needs more support when it comes to individualized instruction? We can differentiate, going to our next slide, we can differentiate our practices for adults just like we do for students as well. And so now this is my favorite one. I've been waiting for us to get here because so often we are asking teachers to do something and we haven't really stopped and said, have we done all that we can? Have we exhausted every measure to give our teachers the opportunity, next slide, to learn and practice what it is that we're asking them to do? You can click away here, Lori. So yes, you saw this before, but I really moved it forward again because this is the crux of everything that we're doing. What is an MTSS is not just about students. That's another thing that Every Student Succeeds Act did, that gave us the flexibility to say, okay, in a day and age where teacher evaluations are real, and some of those teachers' evaluation can deal with people's tenure or their ability to even be gainfully employed. What is our first step when we look at our Danielson data, or if you're in Chicago, our REACH data? Again, we talk about Eckers 3 in class. Our first step is to say, what professional learning is needed for our team? Next slide. Because if we're going to say this about students, everything we want students to know and be able to do, we must be willing to teach them and give them the opportunity to learn and apply the skill, behavior, and knowledge. The next slide is also true. Everything we want staff to know and be able to do, we must be willing to give them professional opportunities to learn and develop professional opportunities to learn and development from an asset-based lens of practice. This actually just came out from ASCD. And I don't know if you know or not, ASCD, they're very much involved in the whole child, whole school, whole community, which actually comes to us from the Center for Disease Control. ASCD has really, I think, been the largest organization to move this forward in our state. I love that they're now saying, wait a minute, whole child, whole school, whole community. Guess what we need to teach the whole child? We need whole teaching, which means we need whole schools, which means we need whole teachers. Next slide. And so when we go back to those conversations that we want to be really rich in data, we have to look at everything that is available to us. Next slide. And make our decisions. So,
Um,
so again, looking at our scale, looking at everything that is available to us, we want to make sure that we have very positive conversations. And I like to say, like, we don't want children to feel like they're expendable, then we don't want our staff to feel like they're expendable either. Next slide.
Whoop.
There we go. Yep, right there.
You went there? Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple examples before I turn it over to Lori. In our state, we used to do all about the Eckers R, and all about the Eckers R was very focused on language literacy. Next, you just click again, Lori. When we shifted to Eckers 3, again, in response to, hey, what's going on with, science, technology, engineering, and math? Eckers 3 was very, very focused on math literacy. Guess what happened when our first Eckers 3 summary reports came out from monitoring? Math was kind of low. Math was actually very low because number one, that math literacy indicators that were new to a lot of us. How do we respond to that? It wasn't like saying, what's wrong with you all? This is preschool, 2 + 2 = 4, get it together. All over ECPL, Erickson, everybody starts saying, oh, this means that early childhood community needs more professional learning around what? Math literacy. So we respond to that data as we shifted from all about the Eckers R to Eckers 3 and looked at that data from those reports, it was not about what's wrong with the teachers, it was about what teachers need. Right. And so that's just kind of an example of how we can use data or information that we have coming from us. And I thank you for saying that, Sharon, Karen, because ECPL, I think, really, really responded to that, not only through their professional learning, but to their team that does the coaching for Preschool for All and program support specialists, really allowing us to have opportunity to really learn, dig our hands in what it looks like to coach and support around math literacy in a EYC. And by the way, math literacy wasn't just kind of poor in Illinois. When we looked at the math literacy across the nation, there was some struggle there. And so there was great responses from that. Next slide. Yep, keep going. Karen's putting a lot.
I might be behind you, so I'm sorry. How about this one?
There you go. That's the one I want. Before we move on to Lori, I just want you to take a minute to look at this. Now, this is an old slide of kids data, kindergarten individual development survey data. And for those of you, I don't know if you know or not, in early childhood, we must screen to kind of get a snapshot of where children are on their domains of development when children enter Preschool for All or Preschool for All expansion. In Illinois, every kindergarten that enters into a public school system is assessed for readiness. It's not an evaluation. They're just assessed to see, where they fall along certain domains. And that information is made available to every district, every school. As you look at this is from 2018-19 data. I just pulled this up. If you looked at this data, what kind of professional learning, if you were in kindergarten or even in Preschool for All, and you say, wow, these children just left Preschool for All or Preschool for All expansion. If you were in kindergarten, or if you're a director of teacher and learning if you look at this, let's just take about 45 seconds. What could these numbers tell us as it relates to professional development or professional learning opportunities for staff? I'm going to be quiet for 45 seconds. Fifteen more seconds. Thank you. Go ahead and start putting that in the chat. And I think that's Lynette. How do you pronounce your name? I'm a real stickler for pronouncing names correctly. Was that Linan?
Very close. Lynn Ann.
Lynn Ann. Okay, thank you. Lynn Ann was saying as Lynn Ann looks at that, that might be an indicator for need support in math. What else would you all say? Go ahead and put it in the chat. And that FRPL is free and reduced lunch, and EL is a student who's a multilingual learner. Laura, more teacher turning, need tier 1 in all areas. Yes, love that. Oh, I'm going to open up the chat and just start reading these. Carrie Abbott is saying, I'd focus on developmentally appropriate practices and social emotional learning. Yeah, Karen, wasn't that social development was a surprise? IEP percentage was a little high. Do we need to do some professional learning around do you understand how to even read the IEP and the 504 plan when you get it? Sometimes it's something it's like, what's going on with our children with disabilities? Sometimes it is something as simple as, let's just press pause and learn how to table read when it comes to an IEP or a 504 plan. Yeah, many students at that time, almost half, need additional support in one area or another. And before I hand this off to Lori, look at that upper left-hand quadrant there. Demonstrated readiness in all 3 developmental areas. 26% of those students who were on track. If we're thinking about MTSS as an asset-based framework, should we, and this is rhetorical because I'm going to hand it off to Lori, should we think about how we are going to have tiered supports for those 26% of kindergartens who came in and they were right on track, right where we needed them to be? Because ESSA says an asset-based lens looks at everything, not just those that are struggling. It really looks at how we're going to have a synthesized, comprehensive practice for all of our students. Take it away, Lori. Keep those things coming in the chat for us, y'all. Take it away, Lori.
Yeah. All right, I will. I love the comments too. I get a little lost in all of that. So for those of you who don't know how Dr. Taylor and I work, we put a topic out there and she pulls things together on her end and I pull things together on my end, and somehow miraculously it all dovetails together. And so you're going to get another perspective from me. And the other thing, not to embarrass you, Karen, but you are one of the faces I can see on the video, and you keep smiling and nodding your head. You're so encouraging. Thank you so much. So we've listened to a lot of content, a recap of the other sessions, and then a little bit about using data around professional development. I'm going to take that a step further, but before we go any farther, I thought maybe we would think about the idea of there's this old saying about not missing the forest for the trees. And sometimes it's nice to go in really far and do all the detailed work, but then it's also really good to step backwards. So we've talked a lot about developing a system of supports. We've talked about evidence-based practices, the history of RTI and MTSS, tiered intervention, using data, all those kinds of things. So let's just take a big deep breath and kind of revisit our why. So why are we doing all of this? Change is hard. Why should we bother trying to change? What's our common goal? So I want you to get a picture in your mind of kind of our common goal. It's really easy to get distracted by all the challenges. There's learning loss after the pandemic. There are staffing issues just about everywhere. Curriculum, funding, some is waxing, some is waning. Culture, absolutely, Laura. State and federal mandates that we may or may not have funding for, scheduling, on and on and on and on. So just take a deep breath and think. So no matter what role or level in education, so I work more with K to 12 level kiddos and schools, I think we can probably all agree that this is our why. Yep. Thumbs up on that one. It's all about the kids. We're doing all of this stuff because we want to see kids thrive in school. So as we go through the last section, keep the why in mind, and then think about what would it take in your school context to get learning growth, the kind of growth you'd like to see and the kids need to demonstrate for every student every year in your school. In your own classroom, if you have a classroom, what could we leave the same? Because there are always things we can leave the same. What might we need to change? Because there will be things we want to change. And then everything else that we talk about, we're going to come back to sort of these big questions. What's our why? Well, it's all about the kids and making things better for them. And then what would it take to get every single one of them, like Dr. Taylor said, those who come in with the skill sets and those who have larger challenges at the beginning, larger deficits at the beginning, how do we get them all to grow from where they are towards where we would really like to see them be? So as we've talked about already, in Illinois, MTSS doesn't segregate the pieces apart. You probably have never seen this particular triangle. Maybe you have, I don't know. But in Illinois, MTSS blends academics and behavior and social emotional learning for all students. And then we have a system pieces that we use to get everything to work together well. So we refer to those system pieces as the drivers of success, so to speak. And you see those at the very center of this triangle, right underneath the all learners. So using data in a system and having systems that work together, and then using evidence-based practices. Those are kind of the big ideas that we harness together to address a multitude of learning challenges that students might experience. And in this triangle, you can see some of the areas that are included in that system, in a multi-tiered system of supports. And we know that using that approach, that framework, can address parent engagement needs. It can address curriculum design and instruction, post-secondary goals, educator professional learning, community and school collaborations, attendance, teamwork. There are lots of things that you might be able to think of too. These are just some, it's not an exhaustive list, but we want to think of all the supports that we have available to students, for students, and consider how we're going to use a tiered approach to presenting those to the students that need them most, and to make a really effective use of our time, that four-letter word, time, and of our resources. So we want to look at the whole system, and we want to look at all of its pieces if we want students to experience growth. So when I work with schools, I usually explain everything we do to support student learning and growth is in an MTSS. Everything goes in here, and we think about it in terms of a tiered framework, and that includes our professional development for our staff. So we've talked previously about the 6 domains of MTSS at the school level, and these are all based on research. And if you look at other states, they may have 5, they may have 7, but they all touch on these big components because they are indeed based on research. Those main success drivers of systems and data and practices that you saw in that earlier graphic, they're woven through all of these domains. And these represent the things that we want to have in place in order for the whole structure, the whole system to be effective. So you're going to notice this visual is an arch with a keystone at the top. And that keystone, if anybody knows anything about construction, I don't know, but I know how to use Wikipedia. So a structural arch, that keystone is at the top, and that wedge-shaped kind of stone is the final place that they put in when they're building an arch, and its purpose is to lock everything else into place. It's the weight-bearing stone. So we like to think about the domains all together with the weight bearing on that multi-tiered system of supports. And we know that if we pull one of those out, the whole thing is going to crumble. If we neglect communication and collaboration, even though we have everything else really strong in place, we might see some shifting. And so these are the things that the research and our experience at the network show us are really important to keep in mind as we develop, if you're going to make it better or if you're going to change it in some way to your MTSS to fit your students. These are the things you want to think about. So we want that structure to hold up, as well as being the willow tree. It's also this strong architectural structure in today. So today we've talked about 3-tiered instruction. So you see that one starred here. We've touched on data and evaluation, maybe a tiny bit, and database problem solving we've talked about a little bit, and we're focused very much on that capacity and infrastructure. So capacity and infrastructure refers to, among other things, the need for ongoing job-embedded professional learning for staff. So building their capacity to do what it is that we ask them to do. So capacity and infrastructure, this domain says that it needs to be present school-wide, and it's really important if we're going to have an effective MTSS and sustain that effectiveness. And it usually includes ongoing professional learning and coaching, if you have coaching a system, whether it's actual coaches or peers who perform the function of coaching for each other. There is usually a schedule to support teaming and collaboration, because we find that very, very important. I don't know about you. When I was trained as a teacher originally, it was more in the model where you just went into your classroom and you closed the door and you were the earth and sun and sky. And it's not like that anymore. We have to work together and collaborate and help one another out in teaching and instruction. And also the thing about that schedule is it really needs to support professional learning for staff. It also includes written processes. So when you have your MTSS system together, I think we talked a little bit about data decision rules last time. Whatever your policies are, you've got them written so that everybody understands them and everybody can refer back to them and make sure they're aligning. So those written processes and procedures and guidelines, you're going to identify your curriculum that you're going to use and your materials that you're going to use, those instructional evidence-based practices, and the standards that you're going to align to. So all of those things are within that domain. We're going to focus more on just that very first bubble, but I wanted to have a feeling for some of the pieces that we look at when we're considering capacity and infrastructure. This is the schedule of those three. The schedule is probably one that we see a lot of schools really struggle with, because it is complex to come up with it and to not let it drive what we do. Antoinette talked about the triangle doesn't get to tell us what to do. Our schedules shouldn't get to tell us what to do. We should tell our schedules what to do, and it should be based on the needs of our kiddos and our staff. Okay, so the domain of capacity building includes professional learning. And professional learning requires that everyone knows and understands why it's important to do it, how it works, and what each person's role within the system looks like. So one of the very first things in building capacity for using an MTSS framework is developing consensus. Do we all understand what it is? Are we all buying in and believing? We want to be sure that the staff has a reasonable amount of consensus on the why and on the what we're doing and on the how we do it. So building consensus is really important because the things that need to change can be difficult to change sometimes. And leadership can't just say, you're going to do it. And then everybody's attitudes and actions change. I don't know if you could think of a time when somebody said, you're just going to do it this way, but I'm going to guess if your reaction is anything like mine, my first instinct was not, okay, I'll just do it that way. It was, I don't understand why. So we want to be sure that everybody gets their questions answered and really understands the why. So we're going to talk about why it's important to make sure that you have consensus and what that means. And then also a little bit more about how it can develop. So on the why it's important is because we all have beliefs and values that impact our decisions. We want to have, in a school system, shared beliefs and shared values that help us to take ownership for decisions, especially when we're being asked to change. And when we have ownership over decisions, when we understand why, and we get to be part of it, then that new practice is more likely to sustain over time. And it also takes a lot less effort to get something finished if everyone, or at least mostly everyone, is going in the same direction, believing the work is good for students and what the school should be doing. And then how it can develop, consensus develops by gathering diverse representation of diverse voices on leadership teams and other staff collaboration settings, and identifying first, what are the beliefs that we all hold? What are the values that we all hold? And then what beliefs and values do we really want to adhere to? So studies have shown that implementing systems change or any kind of change without that shared consensus, that kind of foundation of shared values, that new initiative is likely to fail within 2 years. So if we don't take the time to develop consensus, all that effort that we put in sometimes doesn't even materialize in good change for us. So we can think of consensus as kind of two pieces or aspects. There's climate, and then there's culture. One of these is easier to change, and you might think about that in terms of how they're named, which is easier to change, climate or culture. And we can consider climate as kind of the how we feel within the circumstances of the environment or the school that we're part of. The climate, that can change real quickly in response to events or an activity in the school. Climate is about how we feel. Do we feel secure as staff? Do we feel angry with what's going on? Are we open-minded? Are we exhausted and worn out? Are we full of energy? So it's how we sort of perceive the current situation in the whole of our situation. Culture, on the other hand, represents who we are as a school, and it reflects the kind of embedded how we do things around here. And that one is going to be more solid in spite of those temporary situations or circumstances, anything that we face within the climate. So school culture is really important to academic and social emotional growth because it influences so many of the decisions that we make every day that impact kids and caregivers and staff. So we need to remind ourselves, what do we believe? What values do we hold? And sometimes beliefs and values are more deeply ingrained. I bet you've walked into a school before where you can just kind of feel, there's a positive energy here. You kind of feel, oh gosh, these people need vacation, and that's what we mean by that culture. And because we can feel it walking in doesn't necessarily mean that we can feel it if it is our culture. So sometimes it takes a little bit of energy to tease that out. The other thing about school culture is it changes slowly over time. And the way that we do that is by continuing to communicate, continuing to define, continuing to talk about what we value, and then looking at our decisions and seeing if they all line up. And You might have heard some of these beliefs and values in other discussions, things like, we believe that all of our students can learn if we change the way we teach. It's a really helpful, strong, positive, but that isn't always what you hear in a problem-solving meeting. Sometimes you hear things like, students from that side of the town, they never really try to learn and there's nothing we can do. So that's based on a belief. And you can see if we're in a problem-solving meeting, we have those two different beliefs, we're more likely to make an actionable plan if we hold the idea that kids can learn if I change what I do, than if those kids can't learn because they don't try and there's nothing I can do about it. So those are the things about culture that we really want to address as we think about part of establishing that or building capacity for our staff. So one of the things you might be wondering is, do we need to have everybody on board before we can go farther? And the good news is, no, we don't need 100% to begin making changes. In fact, they tell us that significant cultural change can occur with very much less, something around 20 to 30% of early adopters sharing some common beliefs and values. And given support, the early adopters will then influence the beliefs and the practices of other people over time, kind of like yeast in dough. It kind of gets in there and starts moving. In addition, the research also shows us that supporting staff to change behaviors can influence those internal values. So you kind of have a couple of methods you can begin to use, but the trick is to really minimize staff resistance by supporting those beliefs and values that are really going to help them. We want to be sure that we have that firm foundation. One frequent mistake is to just try to jump into doing it all without taking the time to make sure we have at least 20 to 30% of our folks on board and willing to move forward. Dr. George Batch, who's a kind of a guru in the field of RTI and MTSS, talks about consensus as glue. So it's the glue that helps us to work together as a team. And that lack of that is one of the biggest threats to implementation and sustainability overall. So how do we go about building consensus? Well, I'm going to share a video that might give you some ideas about where your initial efforts at building consensus might be best spent. I'm going to apologize for the video. It's a little bit lower quality, but it drives the point home. So as you watch it, I want you to think about, how does this real life demonstration of building a movement, building consensus, relate to some of the challenges you might be having in developing consensus in your own school, among your staff and students and parents. So here we go.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So I didn't mean to call any of you lone nuts, but if you feel that way, please be encouraged. You just need a few people to start following you. Anybody have anything? I see Carrie put, this is exactly what happened in one of her schools with pyramid model implementation. Any insights from that? Anything that popped out to you, especially as we're talking about change and building capacity and staff professional learning? If you want to come off mute, you can, or just stick it in chat, either way. I love that video. It's available on YouTube. Just look for shirtless dancing guy if you want to use it. But the idea of being able to be easy to follow, willing to look like a nut, and then watching that momentum build as you put an idea out there and clarify it and communicate it and help people be able to do what it is they need to do. Yep, first follower. Yep, pressure off of leadership. Absolutely, absolutely. And off of building consensus. Because I know when we were first talking about consensus, I was like, oh my gosh, if I have to wait till everybody on my staff is on board, we're not going to do anything. But it didn't work out that way. It was a little bit at a time. So the other, another big idea here is the power of collective efficacy and using and flexibility. So if you have a sailing, I don't know if anybody's done any sailing. My father had a sailboat, so we did a little bit of it. Most of it, we fell into the water a lot, but that's okay. Everybody has a role on a boat, just like everybody has a role in a school. And those are usually clearly defined, but those roles on the boat, especially, or on a sports team, if you're a sports person, you know, they don't stay in those roles. When something comes up, they move and flex to support each other. And I think that's one thing, one takeaway from building capacity too, is schools should really think about flexibility when it comes to staffing and roles. It can really be all hands on deck is what it takes to get that instruction and intervention to high quality and fidelity and provided to all the students who need it. You might consider some options for expanding your staffing, like some of the non-instructional personnel include in your school, some tutors, using paraprofessionals, community volunteers. Older students sometimes can be very helpful. It helps both ways, to teach and to be taught. Peers, parents, office support, admin staff, you can be amazed at some of the skill sets that you have if you can take those people and then skill them up to do what it is they need to do. Sometimes using your specialized staff, like special education teachers, psych, social workers, speech paths, to help support interventions for students can also be something to consider. There's also collective efficacy as the evidence-based practice that it is. It's an evidence-based practice that research has shown to be very strong positive influence on student achievement. And if anyone is acquainted is the word I'm searching for, acquainted with researcher John Hattie. He defines collective efficacy as the collective belief of teachers that they have the expertise to be able to positively impact students' learning. So a feeling that I, as a teacher, have what this student needs and I can help them. So in his meta-analysis research, he gives effect sizes to various strategies and actions in education, and kind of a rating on how much influence it has on learning. The minimum effect size that Hattie says we should aim for or use is 0.40. That's kind of the average. He identifies collective efficacy, you can see here on the chart, as 1.57. So very effective, very influential in student growth. When you're talking about beliefs and values, developing that idea of collective efficacy for all. And in case you want to know, using an MTSS framework has an effect size of 1.29. According to Hattie, so that culture of collective efficacy and the framework of a multi-tiered system of supports is really a powerful combination. So before we go a little bit farther down the road of professional development, I thought it'd be good to just kind of pick your brains. If you've had or facilitated a professional learning experience recently where you just loved it, it was just great, you walked away with something valuable, what was it like? What did you like about it? And as you do that, I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit more, but you go ahead and add those things to chat, because a really important aspect of that capacity infrastructure piece is professional learning. So once we have that consensus in place, when we know or as we're building consensus, we need to provide teachers with what they need to know and help them to be able to do what they need to do to provide that high quality instruction and intervention. So our definition of MTSS in Illinois states that MTSS is a coherent continuum of supports responsive to meet the needs of all learners. You saw that definition earlier. And all learners includes the adult learners in the system already. So we want to be sure that we are doing some things like, oh, yep, these are good. Okay. Making it align. Oops, I can't get rid of this chat box here. So making it align, you'll have to read around it. Making it align. We want to be sure that it is evidence-based, and we want to be sure that it is supportive. And I think we're seeing some of those things in what you've put in here: food for thought and reflection, connected to what I already know, expanded understanding, visuals, concrete activities that I can use or implement, valued my opinions and concerns. That's really good. Thank you for putting those in there. So one of the big ideas that comes from best practice is to use data to identify what your staff need to know and be able to do, and then plan your professional development to meet the needs identified in the data. I think I saw some people nodding their heads earlier when Dr. Taylor was talking about that. So you might look at that kid's data, like the example that she gave you, to find the strengths and the needs in your staff, and then plan your professional development to match that so that teachers build the knowledge and skills that they need. And then it's also pretty important to think about differentiating professional learning. So what is it that each group of teachers might need to know? So some of the student learning data that we might consider would be looking at that kid's data. We might also look at teacher perception data. We might talk to teachers, interview teachers, use focus groups. What is it that you need to do your job better? And then even if you have PLCs, maybe that becomes a topic for them to discuss, bring some feedback to you so that you know what it is they need. And then that differentiation piece. And we're going to look at an example here in just a minute. So I think it's really important to think about differentiating professional learning, because It's not one size fits all either, and different groups have different things that they need, and it represents a better use of our time and effort if we're targeting our professional development for those people. So here's an example of how one district is setting their professional learning calendar. And I apologize for this slide. I know it's not really great, but I'm going to guide you through it. And it is a real life example. You'll see it's from Lyons School District 103. This is their professional learning map. So they're thinking about what do who need to know about what, and this learning map. Then on the left, you're going to see some white blocks, and those represent the months of the year. Across the top are different groups within the school that are going to be involved in professional learning and the time block that they each have. For example, that first green block is the SIP team, or the school improvement team, and they meet monthly for 2 hours. Next, in the light brown, are PLCs, and they meet weekly for 45 minutes. And next, going across the top, is purple, and that's the grade level teams, and they meet weekly for 40 minutes. So then following that, there's a column underneath each of those headers. And that includes the focus for their professional development. So all the way across the top, you see a variety of different groups. There's the cabinet, there's social workers, psychologists, the SPED department. And then if you look down, you'll see the content that they're focusing on. So if you look at the staff one, which is 4 over, the kind of pink, I guess they all look a little pink, the 4 blocks over, it says staff. So this is all staff, and they meet for 30 minutes twice a month. In September, since they meet twice, the first time each principal chooses what they're going to do in their school. And the second one, they're learning about PBIS expectations, acknowledgements, and the schedule for reinforcements. So then if you look down in October, the first meeting, principal chose the topic, but the second meeting, all staff were learning about SEL, social emotional learning fidelity. And that's very different from the topics that the school psychs were engaging in. They were learning about grade level team scheduling and FastBridge benchmark data in September, and then grade level team updates and intervention selection in October. The point is that those different roles need different focuses for their professional learning. And then this is an example of how you might be able to do that by just having a map that maps out by the time available and the season, the month of the year, what the focus is going to be for each one of those groups. So the things that you described in the chat there about what you liked about professional learning didn't look anything like this. So that's not what evidence-based professional learning would typically include. Not sitting in chairs, not sitting and getting. We're going to be involved and active when high quality professional learning that really sticks and helps us out is going on. So we want to be sure that we're using evidence-based practices to provide professional learning that's grounded in adult learning principles. And here are some that come from the work of Knowles, and that it's really focused on it's structured to be collaborative and practical and relevant and fun, because we need that too. And we want to be sure that it's job embedded and ongoing, so that it's not just a one-time, you're supposed to get it and now magically you can do things differently. It doesn't work that way. It's got to be ongoing, chunked out into learnable bites, and really that fun piece is important. There's some learning forward standards for professional learning, and you'll see these here all begin with the same stem. They have these 3 categories. I'm just going to give you a snapshot, and then I'll put the link into the chat here. So they have 3 big categories that these standards, let me do more than one thing at a time here. Okay. Fall into. There's rigorous content for each learner, the orange ones. There's conditions for success, the blue ones, and transformational processes that are the green ones. And they were rewritten in 2022, And these new standards have a very important feature, and that is that they have equity woven into each of those big content areas. So equity is part of the conditions for success and rigorous content and transformational practices. So that is a good resource. There's free resources there. If you're a member, there's more resources available to you. But ISB has included professional learning forward standards in the professional development criteria if you're providing licensure-oriented credit hours. And I think it's really important that to remember professional development does not look like this. Well, actually, it does look like this. It doesn't look like a straight line. Adults don't learn 1, 2, 3, and then I got it. It's up and down and over and back and under, and that's okay. That's all right. We revisit as we need to. And then I just have I'm not going to get through everything, Dr. Taylor, so I'm going to be close though. Here's a plan for school-wide professional learning, and that I think you can find on the Learning Forward website. And if you can't, I'd be happy to share a copy, but you can see how they kind of have their data piece at the beginning. First, they do goals at the top. This is what we want to see teachers know and be able to do. And then they have that planning piece. They're thinking about the data and the resources that they have, like time, and then what are they going to focus on? And then at the very end, a column to say, how are we going to evaluate whether it was worthwhile? Another big piece for adult learners to think about is that building capacity through gradual release, so that even as adults, we want someone to do it or model it for us. We want someone to do it with us before we're expected to just do it. And then to know that, sometimes it feels awkward when we learn something new, and that's okay. We just do the best that we can with what we have. We put that growth mindset right into our culture and move forward, knowing that when we know better, we'll do better, and that failure is completely okay. So I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Taylor for the minutes that we have left.
All right, you all. This is it. As you're answering this, what questions might you have? What aha do you have? Feel free to stick to what we talked about tonight. And that the chat has just been, Lori, it's just like, yes, yes, yes. I've just been all in the chat. Feel free to go all the way back from October, November, January, ahas that you have in here. If you need more, let us know, right? Because the questions that you might still have, we want to continue to build. When you see that sign that says build to suit, these professional learning opportunities around MTSS are built to suit. As we're coming up, it's 5:28, so I'm going to turn it over to Kieran in just 1 minute. The Department of Education, I think we talked about this in October, and I just want to bring it back again. It says something when the Department of Education puts out guidance, and that guidance came out in July 2022. And they actually talked about the importance of MTSS as we restore and refine and revitalize and recover from the pandemic and the ongoing impact of the pandemic, recognizing there are going to be initiatives and new reforms. Of course, there's going to be. I love this one. Thank you, Lori. MTSS really allows us, we can't keep, every time you stop to try to reinvent the wheel, we never get anywhere. We use MTSS to support learning, renewal, and restoration, not reinvent, not reinvent. The Department of Ed is saying it. I just shared with you all the literacy law in Illinois. MTSS is written into the law. It's written into the plan. One of our colleagues put in here about attendance. In Illinois, the chronic absence law, MTSS is written in the law. In the pre-K chronic absence law, MTSS is referred to in the law. So it is the comprehensive renewal restoration of so many things, including managing challenging behavior, whether you're using conscious discipline, second step, calm classroom, National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. Let MTSS hold everything together for you all as you go forward. I'm going to turn us over to Karen. It's been such a pleasure to be with you all throughout this time. Lori, if you can go forward, the asset-based trauma-informed sessions will be February 28th and March 5th. I believe you already have the links to those. And these are pre-K to K. So if you know people in your district that are like, hey, you need to come and see this. This is all pre-K to K. And then again, as we think about NAEYC and early childhood, these are going to be things that support even our K1, 2, 3rd grade colleagues as well. So we hope to see you all with teams February 28th and March 5th. And Karen, I'm turning it over.